Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a deeply ingrained pattern of organizational behavior, one that actually led to one of the most tragic engineering disasters in human history. But here's the real kicker. We're going to uncover how that exact same fatal pattern is quietly operating right now, probably inside your own modern AI-augmented project teams.
So I want you to picture the scene. It's the night of January 27th, 1986. There's this incredibly tense 34-person teleconference happening between engineers at Morton Thiokol and NASA management. Two engineers in particular, Roger Boisjoly and Arnold Thompson, are practically begging NASA not to launch the Space Shuttle Challenger. They're presenting hard data warning them not to launch in temperatures below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And the forecast? Well, the projected overnight temperature at the launch pad was a freezing 18 degrees, and it was only expected to hit a really dangerous 36 degrees by launch time.
The response they got back is, well, it's historically tragic. Lawrence Malloy, he was NASA's solid rocket booster program manager, just completely lost patience and fired back, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April." And faced with that intense pressure, Morton Thiokol management literally took the decision offline. They deliberately isolated themselves from their own technical engineers to make the call. When management finally came back, the engineers' objections were officially overridden. The launch was a go. The very next morning, Challenger launched at exactly 36 degrees. And 73 seconds later, all 7 crew members were dead. Now, for a really long time, the conventional wisdom was just, this was a failure of individual judgment, a case of bad managers making one single terrible decision. But when the Rogers Commission did their forensic analysis, they revealed something way more disturbing. This wasn't just a one-off error. It was a deeply ingrained, systematic process failure.
Now, what's really interesting about this is a concept coined by sociologist Diane Vaughan. She calls it the normalization of deviance. Basically, it's this organizational process where a team slowly learns to accept an accumulation of small deviations as proof that things are safe, rather than seeing them as massive red flags of growing risk. Incredibly, the Rogers Commission found that NASA had actually known about the fatal O-ring defect for 9 whole years before Challenger even launched. Over that decade, the organization had just slowly accepted these reoccurring anomalies in the O-rings as, well, evidence that the system was fine, instead of proof that it was a ticking time bomb.
Which brings us to Section 1, the evolution of an error, looking at survival versus safety. Because here's the thing. Between 1981 and 1985, NASA had 24 successful shuttle missions. And because they survived those missions, even when unexpected O-ring problems popped up mid-flight, they fatally started using past survival to justify future safety.
The root of that completely false assumption actually traces all the way back to 1977. Back then, the O-ring joint was certified as Criticality 1R. That basically means everyone involved fully understood that a failure would be catastrophic, but they figured the redundant backup O-ring was a sufficient mitigation. So instead of redesigning a clearly flawed joint, they just certified it. And that meant literally every single safety decision made over the next decade was fundamentally built on top of that one initial accepted error.
Let's move along and see exactly how this danger builds up over time. The Rogers Commission dug up forensic evidence of 9 distinct missions where O-ring anomalies were observed, reviewed, and then just reclassified as acceptable. From STS-2 back in November 1981 all the way to STS-51C in early 1985, this incredibly dangerous precedent was being set. The organizational logic just became, hey, we've seen this specific damage before, and we survived, so it's totally acceptable for the next flight.
The brilliant physicist Richard Feynman actually served on that commission, and he completely hit the nail on the head regarding this fatal logic. He pointed out that NASA had completely collapsed the critical distinction between a system that has not yet failed and a system that is actually safe. I mean, just because a flawed, anomalous system hasn't literally blown up yet, absolutely does not mean it's safe to keep operating.
And this brilliantly illustrates that exact fatal disconnect. The data they were actively ignoring was undeniable. If you map O-ring erosion severity against the launch temperatures, it's glaringly obvious. The absolute worst erosion happened during the coldest launches. Above 66 degrees, erosion was low, but at 53 degrees, the damage was high. And remember, Challenger launched at 36 degrees. This data existed. The engineers knew it, but it was never formally accepted by the organization as a hard, disqualifying finding to halt a launch.
Perhaps the absolute most heartbreaking piece of evidence in this whole story is a memo sent 6 months prior to the disaster. On July 31st, 1985, engineer Roger Boisjoly sent this to the Vice President of Engineering. I really want you to just absorb the gravity of these words for a second. He wrote, "It is my honest and very real fear that if we do not take immediate action, we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight along with all the crew." I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. It's an unambiguous warning, naming the exact mechanism and the catastrophic consequence.
But right here is the true crux of the organizational failure. That memo, it was acknowledged, but absolutely nothing was required to happen next. Sure, management set up a little task force, but they gave it zero authority and zero schedule priority to actually fix the O-ring problem. So the failure wasn't a lack of a clear warning from the technical experts. The real failure was that the organization literally had no process that required a formal, documented response to an escalated technical risk.
And that massive disconnect completely peaked on the night before the launch. You had two totally separate camps. On one side, you have the engineers presenting hard, specific data showing that temperature correlation. And on the other side, management is taking the conversation offline for a, quote, management decision. They deliberately cut the technical experts, the people who actually held the knowledge, out of the final authority to launch.
That very same night, another Theocol engineer named Bob Ebeling, who had been arguing vehemently against the launch, went home to his wife. And he delivered this incredibly tragic warning. He just told her, it's going to blow up. He had this absolute foresight, but he was trapped in a system where he had no mechanism available to him to escalate that risk and pull the plug.
So what does this all mean? Why did management push so incredibly hard? One word: schedule pressure. See, NASA was under this intense policy to hit an unrealistic 24 launches a year just to justify their budget. In 1985, they only actually managed 9. For 1986, their target was pushed to 15. So this extreme pressure entirely inverted their incentives. Delaying a launch suddenly required intense, undeniable justification, whereas just ignoring an escalating anomaly and launching anyway, that became the path of least organizational resistance.
Which brings us right into Section 2, the 2026 AI parallel, looking at normalization at scale. Now, you might be wondering, okay, what does a 1986 space shuttle disaster have to do with our current tech stack? Well, the reality is, modern AI-augmented project teams are running a highly accelerated version of this exact same pattern, literally right now.
Let's actually walk through how this drift happens in a modern AI workflow. Step 1. Your AI tools are generating output way faster than human review limits can realistically handle. Step 2. Because that output was deemed good enough on the last few sprints, your team's review depth naturally starts to reduce. And Step 3, the boundary of what you consider acceptable quality just drifts downward, completely invisibly. The AI's actual error rate might stay exactly the same, but your team's detection rate absolutely plummets. Basically, your team is normalizing deviance just at software speed.
So the crucial point here is that the historical parallels are just undeniable. NASA had recurring O-ring anomalies. Your team has recurring AI output anomalies. NASA was under massive launch schedule pressure. Your team is operating under intense AI sprint and delivery pressure. NASA management ignored Roger Boisjoly's urgent memo. Your management is probably ignoring that risk dashboard that's been flashing amber for 3 solid weeks. The context might be space versus software, but I promise you, the organizational mechanism is identical.
But you know what the really deep irony here is? Today, the tools actually exist to fix this. We literally have anomaly detection frameworks that can track AI accuracy drift in real time. They can alert you the exact second error rates start to climb. We have advanced risk management platforms, things like Saffron or Primavera, that are explicitly designed to track when a risk is flagged and then reclassified without actually being resolved. So the software is absolutely there, but the organizational commitment to mandate a formal process around using them? For most teams, that just doesn't exist yet.
We really need to reframe how we look at these recurring issues. A recurring AI output anomaly isn't just some quirky hallucination of the language model, it is exactly like the O-ring. It's a process exception that is normalized into your everyday workflow. And if nothing happens when a risk is escalated, you don't have a safety problem yet. You just have the exact conditions that are going to create one.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, really vital question to ask yourself about your own organization. Does my process require a formal, documented response when a technical risk is escalated? And hey, if that response isn't provided within a defined window, what actually happens next? Seriously, don't let your team normalize deviance. Build the gate that requires the response. Thanks so much for joining me, and take a hard look at your own escalation processes today.